Hi, my name's Amber Rose McNeill. I'm the director of Normal Porn for Normal People. That's a mouthful. Normal Porn for Normal People. And it is a short experimental film that examines the way that we consume violence within society, particularly within media.
Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Looking at your film, you tend to work with this kind of subject matter and theme a lot. The media's view of violence.
Mhm.
What what got you started in tackling that subject matter? What fascinated you about that?
I think probably because I used to study psychology with a focus on forensic and abnormal psychology. So before I kind of got back into film and started making my own films, I was actually planning to be a forensic psychologist and work within the incarcerated population. So work within prisons with violent criminals, and so you kind of have to know quite a lot about like the pathology and social I don't want to say structures, but the things within society and within environment that can not necessarily create violent people or violence, but kind of have an impact within that kind of violent framework. And so when I decided that I was going to kind of maybe not abandon it, but like put it on hold for a little while and go into film, that wasn't something that I wanted to leave behind. I felt that by making films that can be entertaining but also educational or thought provoking, that I might actually be able to start these discussions and get my opinions and commentary across more easily than I would within like the academic world, where it's kind of everything's very structured and you have to go about things a certain way. Also, not that many people pay attention to scientific journals and what's happening within prisons and stuff like that. So by doing it within a film medium, I think it reaches a broader audience, which is like essentially what I want.
Now you also do narrative film.
I do, yeah.
Yeah. Do you prefer this sort of style of filmmaking over narrative?
Sure that I prefer it. I think it suits part of my personality a little bit better. I mean, it's a lot easier to make in terms of you are solely responsible for the research, for finding the sources, for editing, for sound, for storyline, if there is one, even within an experimental piece. Whereas narrative film, you're relying on a lot of people, and it takes a lot more time. It's a lot more extensive process. A lot more things can go wrong. So in that way, I kind of really love working within found footage and sampling because it's all up to me. And if it fails or falls apart, then it's all me. But at the same time, I do really love like working in an on-set environment, and love running sets. Like I'm really good at running sets. I love working with actors, and I do like telling more narrative stories because I think they um not necessarily reach a broader audience, but they just resonate with people more because people are used to being told stories in a more traditional narrative structure. I'm not sure if that answered your question entirely, but
No, that's fine. I was just asking because I've seen more of your found footage collage type work than I've seen of your narrative.
right.
So I was just assuming, which area do you spend most of your time in?
I started in narrative, so probably like the first 4 years, 3, 4 years that I was making films, even if they were weird and not really fitting traditional narrative, they still were narrative films with actors and sets. And then when the pandemic hit in 2020, I made a shift towards found footage, sampling, but also kind of started to make a move into more personal cinema. So like doing cinematography, but not involving anybody else. I guess it's kind of like a bit of an offshoot, but yeah, I think it's been, I mean, like I absolutely fell in love with found footage and sampling, but it was kind of out of necessity that I really started to do that, and why I've focused a bit more on that in the last couple of years.
Your film Normal Porn for Normal People, uh the title, people might kind of assume it's one thing, but it's really more of an examination of violence in our fascination with serial killers, and um how that really is, if correct me if I'm wrong, but more of what American porn is, you know, in the sense we glorify violence, and we're fascinated by this. I know true crime is very big right now.
Yeah.
One person I don't recognize, and I probably should, is the woman wearing the glasses, the older woman who kind of starts off your film.
The
Where is she from?
beginning. Yeah. Oh gosh, I'm gonna space on her name. I think Mary Whitehole or Whitemore.
That, yeah, okay, yeah, the name sounds a little bit more familiar. Yeah,
Yeah, she was kind of the spearhead against the video nasties in the UK
yeah.
during the 80s, like kind of when people were putting out a lot of schlock horror and like B grade slasher content that was kind of like really sweeping the UK, Australia, the US. She was kind of this very conservative church lady who was like spearheading you know, not just against video nasties, but, you know, that pornography was the root of all evil and that was what was causing violence. And, you know, just this real frenzied sex and violence kind of attack on the popular culture and cinema of the time.
The the juxtaposition of images too. I mean, you have horrific images that you pulled from films, but then you put like stuff, I if I'm not mistaken, look like it's from like a commercial from the 80s where you see like a few women kind of roller skate by the frame. Where'd you find your footage?
Yeah, so for a lot of my found footage pieces, I mine YouTube. I think the bit with Mary in the beginning was the only bit that I had to pay for because I had to from Getty Image. It didn't exist anywhere else.
Hmm.
But really getting on YouTube and like having an idea of what I'm looking for and then searching for it. So I knew I wanted some of the interviews with serial killers, which I already had downloaded previously, like full interviews from my previous studies, but also, you know, wanting to use cinematic clips I'm taking from trailers, which kind of like muddies up the intellectual copyright usage, which is something that I like because if you're taking from trailers and not the film, it's a very different story. But yeah, there are some amazing old school like TV commercials from like the 80s, 90s, some from the 70s and 60s as well. And I'd always had an interest in them. And because this piece, I really wanted to hit on not just like, as you were saying before, that violence has become kind of like the mainstream normalized pornography of America, but also about the consumerism of violence. And I thought a really good way to do that was to kind of like pull some of these like older ads where like the concept of consumerism and discussions about maybe consumerism isn't such a great thing were coming about. So that's where those like little bits of 80s TV commercials came in.
Yeah, I'm probably quite a bit older than you, and I remember the 70s and 80s pretty well. And you know, most of their advertising, particularly in the 80s, started, it's really all sexualized, even,
Yeah.
you know, it, even for like a can of soda. it's um so it's very interesting. What's next for you?
I'm finishing my BFA at the moment. I've got 1 year left of that. Then I'm possibly going to work for a year. I mean, I'm still making films. I am just about to finish my first personal cinema piece called Maya Hunt, which is based on a poem by a Yiddish American poet. So it's very much about like the intersection of being Jewish and womanhood and queerness um, within a very kind of intimate format. I also have an 8mm film, which I'm currently planning that I should be shooting hopefully within the next year, which is entirely POV of a femme presenting or female serial killer as she's kind of pounding the pavement, searching for her prey, and kind of what that looks like, how violence and murder and this prey instinct look different through the female lens. Yeah.
That's interesting. I've seen so many films from the 70s and 80s, especially horror films, and everything is from, nowadays it's slightly different, but there's still a predominant male gaze through everything, probably up until recently.
Yeah.
With that. So that'd be an interesting thing to see and how you tackle that.
Yeah, well, a lot of times when when you're planning, as you probably know, when you're planning to make a film and people are like, oh, what kind of films inspired you? And for certain films that I want to make, like this one, there isn't really anything. I think maybe Trouble Every Day is probably like the closest one that I can think of, because that is through like the female lens, but there's just not a lot of films like that. And I grew up in the 80s watching 80s horror, and it was like all male gaze, very much about killing women. And I made it like a point in my films that I don't want to kill women or trans people. I only want to kill men, because it's very much the opposite throughout most of horror, definitely the horror that I watched growing up. So I kind of want to buck that a little bit and spin it around.
Oh, well, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Do you have any closing thoughts on your film?
I'm just really glad that for a little piece, which was my first appropriated media piece, first ever try at appropriated media, found footage, sampling, I'm just really happy that it's done as well as it has, and that it's still getting picked up for festivals and people are still wanting to talk about it, engage with it, and watch it. That makes me so happy, because this film really means something to me, and I think it has like some important discussion points, questions, and opinions within it that are unfortunately as relevant in 2022 as they were in 2020 when I made it.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you.